Dear academicians, ladies and gentlemen, thank you kindly for your attention. I have a PowerPoint, maybe we can put it up, it's just some slides. Yeah. The work of education is to cultivate the signs of healthy, flourishing, and engaged children and youth. In the Platonic sense, education endeavors to nurture logic, ethics, and aesthetics, truth, goodness, and beauty. In the modern era, the work of education of children, of youth, as well as of adults, has been closely aligned with the world of work and the practice of citizenship. In the age of mechanization, dramatically increased by automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, and computer-assisted design, that is, as the fourth industrial revolution gains new kinetic momentum, the future of work is creating new opportunities and new challenges for the future of education. In this paper, I first introduced some relevant data on the state of education around the world and the factors that continue to impede progress. Second, I examined the broad features of a conceptual model framing education in the current era of globalization. Finally, I offer a reflection on the new challenges and new opportunities in education today. Basic primary education in schools has become a normative ideal the world over. In the past 2 decades, the world has made remarkable progress in participation in education. Quote, the enrollment of children in primary education is at present nearly universal. The gender gap has been narrowed, and in some regions of the world, girls tend to perform better in school than boys, which is making Darwin smile from the grave, because 150 years ago, Darwin announced that educating girls was the key to a healthier, happier, more eudaimonic development for children the world over. Yet, basic primary and secondary education remain an elusive mirage for millions of children and youth around the world. Approximately 260 plus million children are not enrolled in schools, including 64 million children of primary school age, 61 million of lower secondary school, and 138 million of upper secondary school. The ravages of poverty continue to extract terrible costs. Hunger and malnutrition, even as progress is made, continue to cripple millions. A total of 842 million are estimated to be suffering from malnutrition, chronic hunger, regularly not getting enough nutrients to conduct an active life. School readiness is a distant mirage for millions of children. Head Start of the US Department of Health and Human Services defines school readiness as foundational across early childhood systems and programs. It means children are ready for schools and families are ready to support their children's learning and schools are ready for the children. Physical, cognitive, social, and emotional development are an essential ingredient of school readiness the world over. Yet 20% of all children around the world are undernourished, and most of them are suffering from long-term malnourishment that has serious health implications that will keep them from reaching their full potential. Malnutrition causes stunting when the body fails to fully develop physically and mentally and increases a child's risk of death and lifelong illnesses. A child who is chronically hungry cannot grow or learn to their full ability. In short, this steals their future. For those who are enrolled, the little education, especially in the form of literacy, will be vital, but perhaps not enough to thrive to their full potential. Too many children in low and middle-income countries are falling farther and farther behind their peers in the wealthy nations of the North. According to research by the Center for Universal Education at Brookings, quote, at the current pace of change, it could take approximately 100 years for those farthest behind to catch up to the learning levels of those for whom education systems are working well. Beyond school readiness, the second challenge facing schools today is unfolding at the vital link between the wealthy countries in the Northern Hemisphere and the global South. Schools are struggling to properly educate growing numbers of immigrant and refugee youth arriving in unprecedented numbers in Europe, North America, Asia, Australia, and elsewhere. As we shall see shortly, immigrant and refugee youngsters are marginalized as racially, ethnically, religiously, and linguistically marked minority groups in too many countries. The accumulation of disadvantage of immigrant and refugee youth is increasing, and their social belonging is further thwarted. Third, curiosity leading to what Newton called, quote, the great ocean of truth, that is, to cognitive, behavioral, and relational engagement in learning withers in too many school systems the world over. In both high and middle-income countries, the predominant phenomenology of experience for many youth in schools is the antonym of curiosity. It is boredom and disengagement. To sum up, the increased participation of children in schools is a laudable achievement, yet completion and quality education remain a challenge. Furthermore, millions remain out of school and illiteracy remains rampant. 781 million adults over the age of 15 are illiterate, half of them are women. Oops. My machine learning is not so good. Automation has always impacted the nature of human work. Ironically, digitalization is having a smaller impact on the tasks of workers in low-paid manual and service jobs. Positions that demand physical dexterity, visual recognition, face-to-face communication, and overall what MIT scholars in the most recent issue of The Future of Work call situational adaptability. Such abilities remain largely out of reach of current hardware and software, but are readily accomplished by adults with moderate levels of education. Quote, as middle skill occupations have declined, manual and service occupations have become an increasingly central job category for those with high school or lower levels of education in the high and middle income countries of the world. The most recent MIT report on work and its future claims that when the digital turn catalyzed a labor market polarization, that is, quote, the simultaneous growth of high education, high wages, and low education, low wages jobs at the expense of middle-level skills. This imbalance contributes to the divergence of earnings between college and non-college education workers that we have seen in recent decades. Furthermore, production, distribution, consumption of goods and services continues to be deterritorialized. Local economies are ever more integrated into complex webs of global relations. Global networks of production, fueled by international trade, foreign direct investment, migrant remittances, set the pace for the economic life in every continent on Earth. Production is increasingly deterritorialized as growing categories of work with certain clear limits can be done anywhere on Earth. As Frank Levy and my former colleague Dick Murnane argued over a decade ago, tasks that are rule-based and easily broken down into constituent units can be offshored and outsourced the world over. Of course, artificial intelligence is discovering routine cognitive tasks in what heretofore have evaded us as basic human cognition. And this is maybe the greatest challenge of artificial intelligence. Furthermore, global supply chain, the vast network of factories, warehouses, and shipping conduits through which products flow are changing the shape and place of work the world over. Labor migration, global patterns of mobile capital and mobile production are stimulating and accelerating internal and international labor migration. International migration has grown rapidly since the turn of the millennium. According to the most recent data, the number of international migrants worldwide reached over 258 million in 2017, up from 173 million in 2000. In 2017, two-thirds of all international migrants were living in 20 countries. The largest numbers of international migrants, approximately 45 million, resided in the United States. Saudi Arabia and Germany hosted the second and third largest numbers of migrant workers worldwide. The face of the catastrophic migrations of the 21st century is increasingly youthful. Worldwide, 1 in every 200 children today is a refugee, almost twice the number of just a decade ago. According to United Nations figures, in 2015, there were 28 million children forcefully displaced. Another 20 million children were international migrants. Their combined number now is larger than the populations of Canada and Sweden put together. Millions of children are internal migrants. In China alone, an estimated 35 million children have been separated from their families as families migrate from the rural hinterlands into the coastal cities as workers and members of the global economy. Immigration is an ethical act of and for this family. Immigrant children, refugee children, are now the fastest growing sector of the child population in disparate countries like Canada. Over 90% of all growth moving forward in Canada will be the children of immigrants and refugees. Italy, Australia, Israel, New Zealand, the United States. In Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague, two-thirds of the children who woke up this morning, got into bicycles to go to schools, come from non-Dutch immigrant and refugee origin homes. In Stockholm, 40% of the children who got up this morning to go to schools come from immigrant and refugee origin homes. In Reggio Emilia, here in Italy, over 35% of the children in preschools, in the greatest preschools the world has ever seen, Reggio children, are non-Italian immigrant and refugee origin. In the United States, a quarter of all school-age children are the children of immigrants and refugees, and 33% of young adults between the ages of 18 and 30 have an immigrant parent. But schools in the United States and in many other countries of immigration have been slow to respond to the challenges of managing the transition to citizenship, to belonging, to the narrative of the nation of immigrant and refugee origin youth. My colleagues Maurice Krul in the Netherlands and Rita Susmuth in Germany have offered important insights into Europe's uneven record of managing the education of new immigrants and refugees and the transition of their children to the labor market, to the family of the nation. In the United States, the proverbial country of immigration, nativist anxieties and restrictionist policies push back against new immigrants with measurable detrimental effects on their children. We now have data showing the penalty over and beyond poverty, marginalization, the usual suspects on what best predicts schooling outcomes of the children of the unauthorized. Approximately 5 million children today, citizen children in the United States, are growing up in households headed by an undocumented immigrant. We can measure their cognitive delays as a function net of all other factors just flowing from the unauthorized status of their parents. Schools the world over are struggling to develop innovation in student-centered learning to nurture the competencies and sensibilities better aligned to the 21st century's economies and societies. In the fourth industrial revolution, the data are clear. Problem solving, articulating an argument and deploying verifiable facts and artifacts to substantiate and communicate it, learning to synthesize, learning to learn, thinking about thinking, metacognition, and working and networking with others from different backgrounds will be favored in the opportunity structure. It will also be vital to the practice of citizenship and to the development of healthier, more inclusive societies. Students today must be prepared to work ethically with peers who are likely to be from different national, linguistic, religious, and racial backgrounds. Fluency in languages, intercultural skills, a term I borrow from my colleague Rita Susmuth, and to live, to learn, to communicate with colleagues, with peers, with friends and neighbors who cannot longer be assumed to share the same background is urgently needed today. Above all, I quote from Pope Francis, quote, "Going to school means opening your mind and heart to a reality in all its richness and various dimensions. If one learns how to learn, that is the secret, learning how to learn. This stays with you forever." The Holy Father. But the idea that schooling should be a factory for delivering workers ready and relevant to today's systems of production and distribution is a vulgar and reductionistic idea that misses the fundamental nature of what schools can do best. Schooling, as we now understand it, first imagined by the Greeks, must endeavor to educate the whole child for the whole world. Education must serve children and youth for doing and living well, the flourishing Aristotelian idea of eudaimonia. Education must also be to prepare youth for an ethical life of civic engagement, belonging, and for the practice of democratic citizenship. Today, more than ever, schools must give children and youth all the tools from the sciences, the social sciences, the humanities, and from ethics to emerge as warriors fighting unchecked climate change and the environmental dystopia that is now the grave existential threat of our times. Education is more important than ever before in human history, and we now have a much fuller understanding of the causal pathways by which education generates health, a more muscular citizenry, and patterns of status mobility. A strong corpus of demographic, economic, psychological, and anthropological research has mapped the effects of education, measured most often by literacy and years of schooling, on socioeconomic mobility, on social cohesion, and health and well-being. The preponderance of evidence for some time now is hardly surprising. Schooling generates powerful virtuous cycles. Perhaps the most exciting of these findings is the general nexus between literacy and health outcomes the world over. Again, Darwin is smiling from the grave. Educating girls, he advocated over 150 years ago, is the most powerful vector for promoting the common good. Above all, schools at their best make children love life and embrace its fullness. I return to the teachings of the Holy Father, Pope Francis. The mission of school is to develop, I'm quoting, a sense of truth, of what is good and beautiful. And this occurs through a rich path made of many ingredients. This is why there are so many subjects, because development is the result of different elements that act together and stimulate intelligence, knowledge, emotions, the body, and so on. If something is true, the Holy Father says, it is good and it is beautiful. If it is beautiful, it is good and it is true. If it is good, it is true and it is beautiful. And together, these elements enable us to grow and help us to love life, even when we're not well, even in the midst of so many problems. True education enables us to love life and to open us to the fullness of life. In this paper, I first examined some relevant data on education. We established that significant progress continues to be made in terms of access to schooling the world over, but we must do better. Approximately 262 million children and youth are not enrolled in schools today. Second, we examined concentrated disadvantage, poverty, and marginalization as the grave undertow continuing to drown millions of children the world over. Millions of children lack the basic resources for a dignified life. Almost 5 million children under the age of 5 will die of malnutrition. To disrupt these obscene inequalities, we must continue to prioritize global investments, the $400 billion that I think Jeff referred to, global investments in sustainable development, clean water, infrastructure, roads, new schools, and the institutions that need to be strengthened to create and nourish new teacher preparation programs, public health programs, and community-based programs for adult literacy. New technologies, when carefully calibrated with proven curricula and supported teachers, can create new virtuous cycles, even in the remotest corners of Earth. Third, we examine the new normal, Everywhere, more is asked of education. It is the camino real for development and the driver of wellness. UNICEF concludes, quote, "An education is perhaps the child's strongest barrier against poverty, especially for girls. Educated girls are likely to marry later and have healthier children. They're more productive at home and better paid in the workplace, better able to protect themselves against HIV/AIDS, and more able to participate in decision-making at all levels." Additionally, this further goals 2 and 3, universal primary education and gender equality. Fourth, we outline the broad features of a conceptual model framing education in the era of globalization. We examine what I've called the 3 M's of globalization: markets, their integration and disintegration; media, the information, communication, and social media technologies; and migration, the mass movement of people on a planetary scale, as posing a significant challenge to education systems the world over. Fifth, we argue that the forces of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, given its kinetic momentum, inter alia, automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, computer-assisted design, will create demand for new skills to complement the technological advances in the workplace. We outline the nature of said new skills. The claims that the current version of the ongoing technological revolution augurs the end of work seem premature and alarmist at worst. Schools will continue to search for better synchronicity with the changing nature of human work, the practice of citizenship, and better ways to further the health, the flourishing of children today, to face the grave challenges of our times: inequality, climate change, and environmental degradation. Thank you very much.